Another difference is the bodies. The bodies, I'm using a custom, an S2 custom and a core custom as an example. But essentially, you do save some on material because the top is thinner. You basically use a half of a book match. And we can show you inside what I'm talking about with that. But if you imagine our book match tops the way you fold it out, and that's where your curly maple tops come from. If you took half of that guitar top and cut it in half, that's what an S2 custom top is. So the material goes a long way. It literally uses half the material. It's also the grade of the top. It's essentially what we used with the CE bolt-ons years ago. So the grade is a little bit lesser, the cost is a little more reasonable, and we stretch the material a little bit further, all right? So guitar body sanding is another thing I did for a long time and was punished with that all through the years. Paul will do that periodically to me. Just kidding, he doesn't do that. But one of our core violin carves is a very complicated surface, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. This thing struck me the first time I saw it, and it just struck me as a gorgeous shape and just something, you just want to run your hands around. It's a beautiful thing. It's a very complicated piece to make, and it's a very complicated piece to sand. And it's a very complicated piece to finish. So when we did the S2, we said we want the same perimeter. So the S2 Custom has the same outline. If you look at it from the back, they really look the same. But the top is essentially flat. And instead of an intense violin carve on it, it's a flat with a nice bevel on it. So instead of running the ball mill around that top 1,000 times like we do on core, we have a much simpler pattern that we run around with a panel cutter and are able to sculpt this thing very quickly. And that's just on the machine. When the guys get it and they start working this thing by hand, you can see how much faster. You can probably see it with the shadows. You can see how complicated that is, and you can see the shadows on this. That is significantly faster. It's about 3 times faster to process through. It's also easier to get through the finish process. So it just works in our time step. When it gets into the finish system, this finish system that we're using is essentially what we did in the late 90s and the early 2000s. The only real significant difference to me is that the color coat is underneath the base coat. So you guys have probably seen this 1,000 times. So the process goes, get the piece of wood, grain fill it, stain it, you put a base coat on it, you scuff it, you put your color coat on it or your burst on it, then you top coat it. The problem lies inside of rework. So when you're building a guitar, one of the evils of time is if you burn that top coat and burn that color coat, it's like playing Clue or whatever the board game would be, where you get to go back to the beginning again, because you get to go back to the beginning again and you get to start all over. So it's a fine process, but it's difficult to get a guitar to go through there on the first time accurately. By putting the color coat underneath the base coat, you're protecting the color coat, and even if you do burn that top coat, you haven't destroyed the color coat. You can move on a little bit easier. So that's one of the ways that we've been able to, kind of get our process time and our total hours down. Doesn't compromise the sound at all. Doesn't compromise the looks hardly at all. It's just that it's just a different way of doing it, and it's faster.